Hey, yous ever heard of houses? You know, those little buildings people sleep in and hang around in whenever they're not on trains or whatever. Here's a piece of trivia about them. Did you know that they've been around since the dawn of ancient man? I only ask because most of my audience, embarrassingly, are Redditors, and it seems that only recently our Australia realised that housing was a problem when they finally got a response on Hinge, and therefore could swing from being dependent on their mothers to dependent on a younger surrogate of their mother, only to realise, what? I can't afford a house? But I have no marketable skills! Where did I go wrong? But as any normal human being has also noted, there is a housing problem, and I think we all know there is one solution to it. Elect Peter Dutton. I can't believe he's smashing it online saying that he, of all people, is going to solve housing. I'll tell you, Peter Dutton is so lucky that his party had the foresight to also gut public education funding so that people are stupid enough to fall for that. But if he's doing well online, surely Labor, who actually has some real solutions, is doing numbers too. And no videos viral. Oh wait, here's one.
These policies, is it to bring down house prices? Is that what the government wants to do?
We want to bring house price growth into something sustainable. So we're not trying to bring down house prices, but we don't want to see some of the growth that we've seen in some parts of the country where you're getting double-digit increases in house prices year on year.
Why don't you want to be seeing house prices drop? Because if you're looking to get into the market, if you're a young person looking at what's ahead of you, you definitely want to see house prices come down.
Well, that may be the view of young people. It's not the view of our government. We want to see sustainable price growth. We want to see more houses come online. We want to see that rental vacancy rate go up a bit because that will relieve pressure on renters. And we certainly want to see more homeowners. And the government has taken action on all of those pieces this
Minister,
week.
if house prices don't come down, doesn't that mean that this system is stacked against young people, that it's just not going to work for them?
Sure. And Dave, we may have a difference of view about this. I have a strong view. Our government's policies are not going to reduce house prices. We want house prices to grow sustainably.
Well, I think we can all agree that was shocking. Hack being relevant again for literally a minute. Well, it's good to see the ABC's kept up with the quota of every white male in the building being a bearded ginger, because that man's certainly not going to get hired as a lifeguard. But having said all that, fuck, I hate Hack. Treating Claire O'Neill like she's in sticky fingers. We interviewed them on our podcast once to talk about their career-destroying Triple J interview, and I'll tell you, Hack has one slimy tactic. It's the same thing over and over. You get some rank ginger to pick up a word the guest said and then just keep repeating, Thursday? That interview is a perfect summary of today's paradox, in which information is more ubiquitous than ever, but it's all of such poor quality and in such schizophrenic bite-sized chunks that it's honestly worse than not knowing anything. Like, yeah, Labor doesn't want housing prices to go down. And the reason, surprise, surprise, can't be crammed into a fucking TikTok. The housing crisis is a big, complicated problem, which, to give you an idea, it's not just a housing crisis. It's housing crises. There's a housing affordability crisis, a rental affordability crisis, a lack of available housing stock. A lot of investors use housing as a financial asset instead of what God intended it to be, which is a place to watch Simpsons reruns without a shirt on so you can tell your brother, give me the remote or I'll dead arm ya. Come on, that is exactly what millennials think when someone says the great Australian dream. 6 p.m. every night. All of these crises are tangled up and intertwined with each other, and when anyone tries to talk about solving any of these problems, they start sounding like a bunch of Balkan dads arguing about the Yugoslav wars. Housing problemos is because the government won't repeal the housing tax benefits.
You not understand. The housing crisis is because the government won't unlock the new site for the development.
You're both stupid. It's because of those bloody immigrants.
It's a supply issue.
Yeah, it's all about supply.
Now that I think about it, that sketch is just accurate of anyone discussing anything political online ever. But it is especially true when it comes to housing, because when it comes to housing, there's a narrative explaining it that lines up with what you already believed, and here's the thing, it's true. But it's like if the truth was one of those little wedges you collect in Trivial Pursuit, but instead of the category being sport, it's too many Asians. And yes, YouTube profiles that are cars, I know you're having to put that in the comments. Look, I'll bet you to it. There are too many Asians. One's too many. But migration it's just this. It's a wedge. And what we're going to do today is try and collect all the wedges. And to do that, rather than getting lost in a narrative, we're all going to establish some basic facts, and no one's going to like them because, let's be honest, we enjoy complaining about not having a house almost as much as we don't enjoy not having a house. But if you look at the OECD data, housing prices have been going up in basically every OECD nation. In fact, we have it better than a lot of the big boys. Australians pay around 23% of their income towards mortgage or rent, which is high, but it's less than the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand, Chile, all the Scandinavian countries. So as usual, we really can't use the standard American line of, I'm moving to Canada, because we're better than America's Plan B even. Our Plan B, however, is still reigning supreme of moving to Bali. In fact, it's so cheap that you can get a roof over your head there for just a mere boogie board of weed.
Oh, I got permanent residency. Fuck yeah.
Why is it important to put this all in perspective though? Well, it busts a bunch of myths that you'll hear endlessly on TikTok, like, what we need is a vacancy tax so there's more houses. A lot of these countries have more available housing stock than we do. They're still more expensive. It's because we don't have enough public housing. Plenty of these countries have more public and social housing than we do. Still more expensive. It's because of all the foreign students. So migrants again? Yeah. A lot of these countries take far fewer foreign students than we do. In fact, Norway, the beloved fantasy land of anyone who lives here but still somehow is paler than Norwegians, they take in around 98% less international students per year than we do. They still have some of the highest rates of rental and mortgage burden in the OECD. And the reason I'm pointing this all out is because anyone who says
These politicians, the solution's simple, according to my personally tailored feed.
Again, they're contributing factors, like sure, we'll put supply in as one of the wedges. But there are heaps of factors. Factors you aren't even considering, like to get a rental in this country you have to impress this low IQ ogre. And sure, Ralph Babet is intelligent enough to be an Australian senator, but does he have the intellect to open a door for people? I can't tell the difference between this photo and the orangutan driving the buggy.
This is not the Australia that we should want to leave for the next generation.
I honestly think there's some very professional real estate agents out there, but as we explained in this video, deregulating the real estate industry, was that the Liberal Party's attempt at making an NDIS? I'm sorry, but the fact that Clive Palmer's only senator is a real estate agent, that tells you everything you need to know about that industry. You can be an absolute dir, not even pass your real estate license. I mean, look, it's so unregulated that you can be a convicted money launderer dealing in off-market houses and they'll still give your license back afterwards. Now, this is mostly a state issue and state Labor governments are moving on this by creating dedicated task forces to crack down on this industry, but this is a wedge that I swear no one except us ever talks about, despite the fact that everyone is endlessly talking about what's with the explosion in housing prices. What the fuck do you think an auction is? That's just pure hot air right into the bubble. Everyone you know has a story of some real estate agent calling at the last minute. Oh, a mystery bidder from Siam just appeared. Okay, but Siam's not a country anymore. Oh, I was wondering why the phone was crackly. Must be because they're time traveling to buy the house. They're in a category of their own. Slime balls. Add that as a wedge. Now, you want to know why Labor says they don't want housing prices to go down? Well, here's a graph comparing prices from 1970 to 2017. You can see that the price of housing started leaving average earnings in the dust around the late 1990s. What was happening in the late 1990s? Oh, that's right.
The Liberal government!
Look, I'm sorry, I know you're sick of hearing it, but it is factually entirely the Liberal Party's fault. In 1999, the Howard government halved Australia's capital gains tax for individuals, which is a tax applied to profits you make selling something for more than you paid for it, making high-value assets like real estate a great place for rich people to not just store their money, but make it work for them too. And if that wasn't enough, all these brand new housing investors could rent out the property and utilise negative gearing, a part of Australia's tax system that was barely being used prior to 2000. But now the capital gains were halved. This was a very handy loophole. And these changes made Australian property incredibly attractive as a financial asset. Safer than shares, safer than commodities, safe as houses. And given that the main way Australian houses are valued is by comparing them to similar houses that have been sold on the market, once investors start buying up houses, either at or above those valuations, then the value of other houses go up in the area. And then suddenly anyone who owns a house doesn't just own a place to live, they have a very lucrative financial asset, just like the property investors do. An entire generation of LARPing property investors. They want to keep that LARP going. Of course they do. The Liberals very deliberately set the system up in this way so that baby boomers bought into the pyramid scheme, where now their wealth and their retirement is locked into that very pyramid scheme. And what's worse is this was premeditated. Get this is explosive. Howard knew these changes would result in this nightmare future. The Productivity Commission told him and his cabinet in 2004 that his cuts to capital gains had caused this surge in housing prices, and it should be reversed to make housing more affordable. So what did Howard do? Ignored it. Of course he did, because the very intent of the Liberal Party was to turn housing into a stock portfolio asset, and yet you have this bald cunt now saying, making housing more affordable is my top priority. Look at how much better I am. I'm sorry, but the Liberal Party existing, that's like 3 wedges right there. This was entirely their doing. They knew those tax loopholes would do this, that's 1. They absolutely have no intention at all of doing anything about it, that's 2. In fact, their intention is to make it worse. They want you to plunder your superannuation, which is your retirement fund, to further prop up the retirement fund pyramid scheme that the Liberals set up. That's why they deserve 3 wedges. That's also why Claire O'Neill didn't tell this balding ranger in the G-flip shirt that housing prices should go down. It's not just because if she did, the Liberals would have a slow motion clip that they could run until election day of Labor wants your hard-earned investments to go down in value. If you don't think that one clip would cost the Labor Party the entire election, then you're clearly this mouth breather's target audience, aren't you?
Scrap negative gearing and capital gains so a first home buyer gets a chance.
Ooh, that winning combination of self-absorbed, ignorant and arrogant. I can see where their vote is concentrated in the inner city. Shorten took tax reforms on negative gearing and capital gains to the 2016 and 2019 elections. These are reforms that would have helped around 250 to 500,000 people purchase homes. We've gone over this in detail here, but the Australian public looked at that and thought, I'd rather have Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison, the guy that literally couldn't take the heat. Even when the Albanese government asked the Treasury to take a very normal look at negative gearing and capital gains tax changes, that set off a month-long coalition scare campaign. And why? Why did they go so hard on it? Because the coalition know what the youth refuse to accept, which is that that alone would win them the election. Just that, by itself. I know you don't want to hear that. It's not a nice thing to say. It's not a good thing either. But it's the truth. This is what's particularly infuriating about the Greens and Independents, is they know full well the truth. They know full well that if Labor touched those concessions, they'd be out of power for another decade. But they sit there and pretend Labor and Liberal don't care about young people, just to suck up votes of shitheads who really are just as selfish as boomers. They're just pissed off that they weren't born for the gold rush. But if they were their parents, they'd vote to keep them. When they inherit their parents' little property fiefdoms, they'll vote to keep them. That's what Howard's done. He's created a landed gentry class, and like all landed gentry, what? When have they ever said, why, owning all of this here Kentucky might be too much for one dang southern gentleman. It's taken away from my other interests, such as mint tulips and closeted homosexual affairs. Of course not. As a wise man once said, and we're generalising, but really, there's 2 types of people in the world. There's those that fly private jets and those that wish they could fly private jets. Once you're in on the land grab, you want to keep what you grabbed. You shouldn't be looking at Claire O'Neill over high housing prices. You should be looking at your parents. And let's be honest, once you inherit those houses, you should be looking at you. They bought into the scam. The scam is now their life savings. And be honest, you don't want it to go down either, because that scam is your inheritance. And you might sit there and say, oh no, I want everyone to own a house. Sure, pal. Let's check back on you in 25 years when daddy's deady, and instead of fighting over the remote, it'll be you and your brother. Give me the wheel or I'll dead arm ya. Fuck off, Nathan. The Great Australian Dream 2050 edition. Honestly, that is the most perverse legacy of John Howard. He made this country a far more selfish place forever. As another wise man once said, John Howard turned it from the land of the fair go to the land of fuck you, I've got mine. And I'm using a lot of wise men, by the way, because I forgot who these wise men are. But anyway, the point is, Plan A off the table. You can continue to believe the opportunistic lies of the Independents and the Greens were just telling you what you want to hear, which is that, yeah, we'll just magically make housing go down, even though there's literally not enough votes in the country to do it, and that'll wipe trillions of dollars of people's investments off the table, but we'll do it. And we'll do it because we'll never have to deliver on it. Or you can get behind the party that is actually trying to address the problem in the real world, who is clearly telling you Plan A isn't going to work. It's time for Plan B. Move to Bali.
The B's for Bali!
No, in short, Plan B is dealing with all these other wedges. It's building 1.2 million new homes across the country by the decade, and before the cars can say, yeah, to house all the migrants. Labor's the only party that's proposing to meaningfully cut migration. Dutton pretended, oh, I'm going to be even tougher on migration. And then when asked about it again, I don't remember saying that. And then voted with the Greens to block Labor's migration cuts. I'm telling you, it all makes sense when you hear him talk about migration to his donors behind closed doors. When asked about queue jumping visas, he said,
I think we'll bring it back in. Whether we do it before the election or look at a different design for it, well, we'll have to consider all of that.
but you keep believing his public statements that completely contradict each other. How do you get Liberals to stop voting for Liberals? There's also the fact that the TikTok inspector's always going on about, which is that tradies don't know what they're doing anymore. And that's why housing, since the Liberals got in, what a coincidence, is shithouse. It's because they privatised the TAFE system. This is why Labor's offering all those free TAFE positions. It's to ensure we actually have people ready to build these houses that are also from Australia. So we don't have to take in the huge amounts of migration for skilled labour anymore. There you go, cars. Secret White Australia policy. The big bonus is tradies will actually know what they're doing again. This is why they've also invested $32 billion in housing in just 3 years. Fucking huge. While the Greens are just pretending, Christ, this is slimy.
$3 billion to be directly spent on social housing. That's 6 times what the government wanted to spend. And it wouldn't have happened without the Greens there to push them like hell to make it happen.
Honestly, if the Greens were a company, Adam Bean would be in jail for fraud. See this video here? They're lying about even that, but the fact that they go on and on about, yes, $3 billion, so much, and then have the gall to turn around to Labor dropping 10 times that, that's actually not good enough. In fact, not just pretend it sucks, block it. Remember the HAF? Remember all the whinge merchants pretending the HAF was going to implode in on itself and be worse than nothing? It's always worse than nothing, isn't it? As of its last performance report, the HAF has made around $885 million in net earnings since it was created. Could have made way more by this point if the Greens didn't block it for a year, and then they could be bragging, we got $4.5 billion for public housing, even though we didn't. Not even a year in operation, it's approved 185 housing projects across the country, which will deliver around 13,700 affordable homes. Could have been in operation for 2 years, but the Greens and Liberals blocked it precisely because they knew it would work. Look, Labor's already made a lot of progress in reducing homelessness and poverty, and this is the most exciting part about it all. You have to remember that the HAF is a snowball policy. The longer it stays in, the more housing it makes. I've done a 6-hour stream explaining how significant this is, and even then, not the biggest thing in housing that the Liberals and Greens have teamed up to block. Build to rent, that was a government policy to build another 80,000 apartments. So what's that, 150, 200,000 people getting a clean place to live at way under market value? Blocked by the Liberals and Greens. Again, purely so they can turn around and say, look, Labor's not doing anything about housing. They also blocked Help to Buy. This is despicable. This is wiping close to $400 grand off of mortgages for struggling first home buyers by giving the government a stake in the property instead of the banks. I don't think you understand how ingenious this is. Labor's done the impossible. They've artificially made homes cheaper without making their value drop. Everyone wins. They've done the impossible, and yet the Liberals and Greens blocked it for a year. And why? Also, no one can actually feel the impact of these policies, so they can turn around at the end and have their cake by saying Labor sucks and they're not doing anything about housing, and eat it too by saying at the last minute, we've cooperated with Labor by passing these bills. What are you talking about? Knowing full well that they've left it way too late for this to have any tangible impact on the country because it's too close to the election. And yet these are the parties that are now running on how they care so much about the housing crisis. And before we go on, a drop of nearly $400,000 on your mortgage. I can tell you right now, the reason that this wouldn't impress G-Flip here is because he wants to buy a house in fucking Leichhardt. This is another huge problem with the press class. They are upper middle class. When they say there's a housing crisis, what they mean is they can't buy a house in Paddington like their parents did. But for the average Australian, those that aren't in the market for a Paddington terrace, they're in the market for a Padstow townhouse, $400,000 is a lot of money. This is why you never hear about this policy. The press class aren't wowed by it because to them, $400,000 is the decimal point on the houses they feel entitled to. And these are the assholes filtering information out to the public. But as you can see with the HAF, Build to Rent, Help to Buy, this is like traffic control. This is the federal government looking at the congestion points of housing and trying to unstifle them so that the circle of life ecosystem starts flowing again, where you can move from pov cunt to poor fuck to debt-laden fuck to homeowner and finally to landlord lording it over the pov fucks. Now that's the real great Australian dream, huh? You
You lording it over your little brother. Give me your rent or I'll evict ya.
Fuck off, Nathan. Anyway, I'm sure the Australian public will vote Dutton back in at some point, and it will remain the great Australian dream. Come see my show. It's about aliens.